Questions about chapter 1? Okay. So there, chapter 2, you see, we kind of skipped over it. There isn't a whole lot in chapter 2 that we discussed. Chapter 2, there are two main questions coming from that. Strategic inflection point. You might see a question like that, and that's a point at which where you realize the competitive environment has changed so much that it causes you to take a dramatic shift in the direction you're going. Examples of a strategic inflection point would be the introduction of the internet in the retailing industry. I think the pandemic probably created a strategic inflection point for a lot of businesses, restaurants especially. So you can look at different times in the industry where a strategic inflection point caused everybody to shift what they're doing, change what they're doing in a big way that made you go back to the drawing board and rethink your vision and mission, even why you're in business and how you could change the way you're doing business to better respond to this new environment. So we want to talk about the 5 primary board of director responsibilities. I might ask you a question like, what is the most important of the 5? And the most important is to look after shareholder interests. And the reason is that you remember the board of directors is also responsible for hiring and firing the CEO. So they're responsible for making sure that top management is performing ethically, but also that there isn't a conflict of interest. You know, if you're offering bonuses for short-term performance, it's a board of directors' responsibility to make sure that top management is looking out for shareholders' long-term interests, that they're placing their resources in a way that doesn't just maximize their annual bonuses, but that helps the company move in the right direction in the long term. You know, so take a look at that on your PowerPoints. Chapter 3 was about every textbook, business textbook has a chapter on ethical behavior. And chapter 3 is also going to discuss corporate social responsibility. And in that, we talked about the 6 areas of corporate social responsibility and the benefits of social responsibility. It is highly likely that you will see those questions on the test. So social responsibility includes more than taking care of the environment and giving back to communities, you know, philanthropy. Social responsibility also includes taking care of your own employees and making sure that they're working in a healthy environment. Though there is a lot of research to support the fact that we now see that as fact that if you take care of your employees, that they take care of you right back by taking care of your customers. So it increases long-term customer satisfaction, long-term customer loyalty, and long-term profits because of that. Also, investing in things like diversity is also one of those things that companies who are investing more in diversity have found that they increase innovation, they increase employee satisfaction, they decrease turnover. There are a lot of positives from increasing diversity. And by diversity, we don't mean just surface level diversity. We mean deep level diversity, different perspectives, different ways of thinking, different cultures, you know, so deep level diversity as well can help companies respond to this global marketplace that companies are in today. We're no longer in an isolated, you know, country by country marketplace. We're in a global marketplace and we're all connected. And what happens in our country is going to affect many countries in the world. What happens in Europe will affect us as well, and China will affect us as well. So we're all interconnected, and for that reason, diversity initiatives are one of the things that is considered to be part of a company's corporate social responsibility and can help improve a lot of their important numbers that shareholders are going to be looking at as well. Operating ethically and legally, of course, that's a given. That's one of them. And the board of directors, and that's part of their responsibility, is to ensure that the top management is operating not only in a legal manner, but also ethical. As you know, there are things that are legal, but they're kind of borderline unethical as well. Companies that believe they should get ahead by performing on that line, that borderline between what is ethical and unethical, they're typically the ones that start losing customers in the long term, have the worst customer survey numbers, customer satisfaction numbers, and tend not to do as well in the long term. So there are a lot of good benefits. This is not just the right thing to do. Corporate social responsibility also has been related to profitability and long-term corporate success. So it's not just the right thing to do. It's also smart from a financial standpoint as well. So you'll probably get some questions, at least one question about corporate social responsibility. What are the factors that make up social responsibility? And what are the benefits of corporate social responsibility as well on the test? All right, so then we get back into the development of the strategic plan, what's involved in a strategic plan in Chapter 4. Chapter 4 discusses the external environment, and we talk about the macro environment and the specific micro or task environment. Most textbooks refer to the micro environment as the task environment. I don't like that term because I feel like it's not clear what that means. I would prefer it to be called the micro environment. So the macro environment would be the trends that are occurring in the environment that affect all industries, no matter what industry you're in, automobile or, if you're in the travel industry or if you're in the retailing industry, it's going to affect you in some way, some more than others. Things like the economy, the political environment, the laws, legal environment, the environment itself, the natural environment itself, technology, the sociocultural environment. You can use the acronym PESTEL, 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 to identify the macro environmental variables, All right, and that's one that you could use. Some textbooks use that. I don't believe it's used in our textbook, but a lot of strategy textbooks use that acronym, stands for political, economic, sociocultural, technological, environmental, and legal environment, the laws. And they all affect the way we do business. So we're looking at, in the external environment, are there things going on in the pestle or macro environment that could affect how we do business or change how we do business? And in the micro, we use Porter's 5 forces, I can't spell. Porter's 5 forces. And remember, we talked about the 5 forces, the bargaining power of suppliers, the substitutes, the availability of substitutes, the number of and intensity of competition, the bargaining power of your customers, and then also the effect of other external groups, the customer groups or maybe community groups that could affect how you do business. So you might get some questions about environmental variables that could affect an industry. What are they? And then on the micro, what are the Porter's 5 forces that could affect how a company does business or the attractiveness of a business opportunity? Remember, what we're trying to do with Porter's 5 forces is to measure how attractive an industry is based on the power within these 5 forces, how strong they are. So we would love to be in an industry where there's little competition, where the industry is growing, especially at a double-digit rate in terms of the customer demand for the products, where there are plentiful suppliers, where you have more than one supplier. You don't have to rely on one supplier who could go out of business tomorrow, and then your business is gone. So there are a lot of suppliers, and you have some bargaining power over the supply chain. They don't dictate to you how you sell their products, that you have some bargaining power as well. And you don't have a lot of outside influence, consumer boycotts or community groups that are making it more difficult for you to do business in that environment. And there aren't very many substitutes. And one way you can shield yourself from perceived substitutes is to create a uniqueness that is valuable to your target market. And that uniqueness has to be, or should be, something that's very difficult to copy. And we talked about a lot of examples in class, Apple, their ability to innovate and get those innovations to market quickly. That's one of their sustainable competitive advantages. Walmart's distribution system, where they can buy in bulk and go put their products in these regional distribution centers, warehouses, so they can respond quickly to their stores, so their stores don't run out of stock very long, or aren't out of stock very long on their items. They have a really good information system to keep up with the product turnover on their store shelves, so they know exactly how much they're selling of each stock keeping unit in their store. That is a powerful, sustainable competitive advantage, besides the fact they're just so large. We have other companies like Google that has a very unique corporate culture that allows them to innovate more than most companies. So corporate culture can be a very powerful, sustainable competitive advantage. So that's how you shield yourself from the power of these 5 forces, is by having a uniqueness that's valuable to your target market. That's the main goal of companies, is to differentiate themselves from others through this powerful uniqueness. We talked about the issues priority matrix. I don't know if you remember, we use a lot of decision matrices in strategic planning. They don't necessarily tell us exactly what we need to do, but they help point us in the right direction. And the issues priority matrix is one that we use to identify environmental trends that could have a big impact on us, and that are most probable, the things that are going to happen, most likely to happen. So it identifies all of your threats, and it places them in a matrix based on 2 things. One, how big of an impact, if they do happen, how big of an impact would it have on our company? And 2, how likely is it to happen? And what it does is it focuses us on the environmental threats that are likely to happen and will have a big impact, and we respond to those first. And then we get to those threats that are towards the bottom of the list in terms of, having lower impact and less likely to happen, if we have enough resources to get to them. Again, this is based on the information we have at hand. It's not going to necessarily be 100% accurate, because we don't have a crystal ball and we can't predict the future. But what it's supposed to do is help us to focus, again, our resources and allocate the resources to those things that are most important, that are most likely to happen and will have the biggest impact on our company. All right. We've already talked about the Porter's 5 forces. You probably will get a question or two. May not be a short answer or an essay, but it could be a multiple choice. So do read over the 5 forces analysis if it's been a while since you've talked about that. I know you probably have talked about that in at least one of your other classes. What is strategic group mapping? You might get a question like this. Why is it also called perceptual mapping? Well, strategic group mapping is what we use in the simulation. That is also, in the simulation, they call it a perceptual map. So when you go to your R&D page and you see the map with all the bubbles on it, with the different segments, market segments, and you see where your product fits in those segments, that is a perceptual map. We call it a perceptual map because it's based on consumer perceptions of your product and where your product is within a particular market segment, right? So it's not based necessarily on what you think as a manager, or what the board of directors thinks or the president thinks. It's what consumers perceive. And you might say, well, what consumers perceive is not accurate. That doesn't matter. What they perceive is their reality, and that's what we have to deal with. And they might perceive it in the wrong way because maybe you have a marketing or message problem. You're not getting your uniqueness communicated in an effective way, and you have to change that. But perceptual mapping is a mapping of consumer perceptions on a competitive space, and it's mapped on, the one we have in the simulation is only 2 dimensions. And in the simulation, we're looking at the performance of the product. And the other dimension is, let me get that up here so we can take a look at it. Hold on, CapSim. All right, log into it. Get here, guys. Well, I'm not going to go into, I'm going to go into one of my undergraduate classes. So, and the reason is that I don't want to reveal any competitive secrets. So let me go into one of my undergraduate classes. And their map is going to be a little bit different from yours, because you'll see it's a more simplistic version. This is the undergraduate version. They start out with 1 product and only 2 segments. This is their perceptual map. And their 2 dimensions is performance and size. Okay, so that's performance and size. And so their first product that they're introducing is introduced in the intersection of these 2 segments, and that changes over time. These 2 segments begin to separate as we get to round 8. Of course, you guys have 5 segments, and your 5 segments will have some intersections, but they'll begin to separate as well as we get to round 8. So this is a perceptual map. So these are based on consumer perceptions. It's not something that you have control over in terms of, being able to change your product immediately on the map. You change the product's perceptions through your functional decisions, your operational decisions, your marketing decisions, your HR decisions. So all of those functional area decisions create a perception to consumers. And that's how your product is put on the perceptual map. That's strategic group mapping. Okay? And that's how we know if our functional strategies are a good fit with our intended strategy, our intended generic strategy. So if we look at consumer perceptions and our product is outside of that segment bubble, then we've made some mistakes. We've got to go and change our strategy, change maybe the R&D of our product, or maybe it's operational, maybe it's our human resources, maybe it's our marketing. Oftentimes it is our marketing, the message that we're sending out, or how we're communicating. Maybe we need to change our medium, the way that we communicate with our customers. So you might get some questions on strategic group mapping. It's the same thing as perceptual map. Any questions on chapter 4? Okay, in chapter 5, we go over some things that I think are really important, and that is when we look at the internal strengths and weaknesses, one of the first places that we're going to be looking at is our company's finances. So we did go through a short overview of financial spreadsheet analysis, and I'll review that in just a minute. But one of the things I want you to know from the chapter on identifying strengths and weaknesses is that, first of all, we need to be sure that we are comparing ourselves or benchmarking ourselves mainly with our direct competitors. Our direct competitors are those who are in the same segment bubble or the same competitive space as we are. So if you look at the 5 different competitive segments in the CAPSIM simulation, that each one of those segments will contain direct competitors. So if you are mainly in the traditional segment, then you are mainly comparing yourself with the other competitors within that one traditional segment bubble. All right. So when we're looking at the industry reports, we're looking to get best practices from the industry leaders within the traditional market segment, if that's one of your primary segments. So make sure that you're comparing yourself with your direct competitors. You can also look at the industry averages, of course, but what's even more important is how you compare with your direct competitors. And so it's a couple of other definitional things here. What's the difference between a distinctive competency and a key success factor? Well, the distinctive competency is what you do better than anyone in your segment bubble. The key success factor are the things you must do well in order to be able to compete. Okay, so in the simulation, they are calling the key success factors the customer buying criteria. So when you look at those industry reports, you see the customer buying criteria. And the number one buying criteria, it better be something that you can do well. So it differs by industry. I give you several examples on the PowerPoints. I will probably ask for an example. Distinctive competency for Apple, for example, is its ability to innovate and get its innovations to market quickly. A key success factor would be what is necessary to stay in business within that industry. In the technology industry, in Apple's industry, you better be able to innovate. It just so happens that their distinctive competency is also a key success factor in that industry. In the fast food industry, what do you need to be successful in the fast food industry? Well, the food needs to be fast, needs to taste good, and it needs to be priced competitively, reasonably. All right. So if it's not quick, if it doesn't taste good, well, why do you eat fast food? It's not necessarily healthy for you, but you're eating fast food because it's quick, it tastes good, satisfies the need, and also you want to make sure that it's priced competitively. All right. So a key success factor relates to the industry as a whole, whereas a distinctive competency is what one particular business within that industry, what that firm does better than most, if not all. What are the factors that determine the sustainability? We like to use the VRIO. Let's see. Well, let me get back there. The VRIO method for determining that. Valuable, rare, difficult to imitate. The I stands for different. And then O stands for organization, that your firm is organized to take advantage of this difference, of this uniqueness. And really, it's a strength. It's something you can do well. So valuable, rare, difficult to imitate, and you're organized to do it. And I don't like the O part of it. It just means that it's something you can do well. That's the factors that determine the sustainability. So if it's something that's unique and rare and difficult to imitate, but you're not really good at it, it doesn't make sense, does it? Because somebody else will come along and say, well, I'm good at that. And yeah, it might be difficult to imitate, but I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it much better because I'm better at it than they are. So those are the things that determine whether or not a firm's distinctive competency is one that can be sustained over time. Product life cycle theory. I think most of us already have heard of this, and that's the theory that products go through a definite life cycle like humans do, being introduced where you experience this high rate of growth, and then the growth phase where you're continuing to grow, the word is out, everything's going good in the industry, and then we reach the maturity phase where it is very competitive. You could say that the airline industry, for example, is in the maturity phase of the product life cycle. And then at some point, most products go through a decline phase where the need for that product because of sociocultural reasons, or maybe because of just changes in society, demographic shifts in society, the need for the products dying out. Example in the United States would be, cigarette smoking, because everyone knows now the health risks of cigarette smoking is almost dead, but it is sadly been replaced with vaping. And a lot of younger people are vaping, and now we're just now learning the health risks of vaping. But traditional cigarette smoking has been dying out for decades, so companies who were in that industry would have had to find some type of diversification strategy in order to continue to grow or even stay in business in the long term. How should the SWOT analysis be used? There is a high chance this question will be asked on the test. And this is one I feel like should be one of the main takeaways of this class. And the 3 highest priority actions should come from the SWOT. Here's how we use the SWOT. And a lot of people know how to develop a SWOT, but they don't know how to use it. So priority number 1 is always about fixing weaknesses related to industry key success factors. All right. So we won't be able to fix all the weaknesses. When you survey your customers, they'll complain about a lot of different things. Some of them are minor. Some of them are very minor. So for example, when we do a survey at CSU to our students, we always have a few students who will comment about lack of parking. That's become less of an issue now that we have so many online classes, but it used to be a bigger issue. It's one of the reasons why we built that parking garage. One of the main reasons why we built the parking garage. And so, when we look at all the other things that we need to do that are related to our mission, that are related to our strategic objectives, the parking issue is way down on the list. And the reason is that almost all universities have a parking issue, have a parking problem. Students complain about having to walk too far to their classes. So we felt like it's not an industry key success factor. It's one of those things where we would get to it if we had the resources to do it, but if we needed to get to other things that were more important, such as increasing our graduation rate, improving our student success post-graduation, increasing our freshman retention rate. All of these things affect not only our funding, but they affect student success, which is our primary mission. So we're going to fix the weaknesses related to our key success factors first. And then if we have enough resources and time, we'll get to those other weaknesses that are lower down on the list. But that's going to be priority 1. Priority number 2, and sometimes we're doing this at the same time, is develop growth strategies. And the best growth strategies, the strongest growth strategies are those matching our strengths with environmental opportunities. These are trends, again, opportunities going on in the environment that might open up new business ideas or new product ideas for us. So we want to look at what we're strong in, what we can do well, and then match that with the new environmental opportunities. An example with CSU is that our latest product offering in the Turner College is cybersecurity. In the Turner College, we have the computer science department, as you know, is included in the Turner College. And we had professors who had knowledge and expertise in the area of cybersecurity. So we developed a cybersecurity center. We did get a government grant to help us do that, but it's been a very popular new program for us. We noticed the growing trend in businesses and the need for people who specialize in cybersecurity. So that's how we were able to match what we can do well with a growing trend out in the environment, and that's been very successful for us. Those are the strategies that tend to be most successful, matching your own company strengths with new trends in the environment that might open up new opportunities for you. And priority number 3 is going to be buffer against external threats. Okay, we're going to use the issues priority matrix to determine which threats are most likely, will have the biggest impact on us, and we're going to focus on those threats. Now, sometimes the external threat is so large and so looming that moves up to priority number 1. Case in point would be the pandemic. We had companies had to stop everything they were doing and reorganize and figure out how to respond to the pandemic. That's something that was just thrown at us, and very few people were able to anticipate that. So sometimes that happens in the external environment, but normally this is the order of priority, right? And so if you have any weaknesses, you may not, but if you have any weaknesses related to the industry key success factors, fix those first. Okay, so if you don't, we're going to priority 2, which is develop a growth strategy. Remember, 80% of all strategic plans are designed to grow the company. We're going to go to growth strategies. The best growth strategies are matching your strengths with opportunities. So now we've hit the weakness category, the strength category, and opportunity. The only other thing we haven't is the threat category. So that's going to be priority 3, unless the caveat that the external threat is one that's looming and could be very big. That might move into the number 1 slot there in terms of your order of priorities. All right, any question about chapter 5 before we move on to the financial analysis? Okay, so in the financial analysis, I'm not going to ask you for any formulas. The formulas are pretty obvious, though, if you look at the name of the ratio. I will ask you questions like, is higher better or lower better? The debt to assets ratio and the debt to equity ratio, lower is better in general. But what we're trying to measure with these 2 ratios is, do we have a good balance between debt and assets or in debt and equity? We're always asking the question, you need funds to grow your company. Where do you get the funds? Some people say, well, let's go straight to selling more shares of stock. Problem with that is you're, number 1, losing control of the company. Number 2, you're affecting the earnings per share, which could depress your stock price. So shareholders won't be happy about that. So normally, if you have a good credit rating, if your debt to assets ratio, your debt to equity ratio, your current ratio looks in balance, looks good. Remember in the simulation, we said when you get to the finance page, if long-term debt is not more than half of that total liabilities and equity picture, then you're okay to borrow more money. All right, if it gets close to half, you might think about selling stock. All right, but you do want to protect your stockholders. You want to protect your stock price. So oftentimes we go first to bank loans. And then from there, if once we've exhausted that, we need more resources, more money to grow, then we would go to maybe possibly selling more shares of stock. But most of these, I'm going to ask these questions. I would expect that you know which ones of them are higher is better. Profit margins, as you know, the higher the better. You know the difference between gross and net profit margin. Net profit margin is closer to what you take to the bank. You got to pay taxes on it, but then that's what you take to the bank. Gross profit margin just includes the cost of goods sold. It does not include your operating expenses. All right. Okay. Any questions about financial analysis, basic financial analysis? Okay. So in chapter 6, you will get some questions about the balanced scorecard. We had an article on the balanced scorecard. Go back and look at the questions and look at my feedback to you on those questions for the balanced scorecard article, you should still be able to see that. Can you all still see that and see my feedback on that, the balanced scorecard?
Yes.
Yes, okay. So you'll probably get some of the questions that are on that article, that same questions that you got on the discussion board. You might see one or two of those questions on the test, either in the form of short answer or could be an essay question. Um, are financial objectives more important than strategic objectives? No, they're equally important. Yeah, of course, if you're a for-profit company or if you're nonprofit, you have to pay your bills. But what we're trying to say is that make strategic objectives as important because that ensures your long-term success. All right. Um, all right. So we didn't talk about the TOES matrix. In your textbook, they talk a little bit about the TOES matrix. You won't see that on the exam because we didn't talk about this. The TOES matrix is just a way you could look at developing ideas for a strategic plan. And I think it has maybe some value, but it doesn't help me a lot in developing ideas. But you can read about that in your textbook. You won't see questions from the TOES matrix on this test. We talk about the best value strategy and give a real world example. For each of the basic competitive strategies that Porter developed, I would like for you to give a real world example of it. And what are the potential risks? Okay, so you'll probably get questions like that. This is a big part of the class, developing business level strategy, right? So the risk of a best value is just that it is difficult to maintain over time. Your balance, it's a constant balancing act. You have to invest to differentiate your product, but at the same time, keep your cost structure down so that you can deliver value to the customers, perceived value to your customers. We use, Target as an example. We use, well, I thought about this focused. Remember, best value could be focused or broad. A focused best value strategy is Trader Joe's. Trader Joe's is different because they sell a lot of organic stuff. Their whole atmosphere is different. They also communicate a lot of value to their customers. They have younger people frequent Trader Joe's stores, and they find the pricing to be very competitive, less than most grocery stores. And I found that to be true. If I'm in a city that has a Trader Joe's, I go in there, their prices are very competitive and oftentimes lower than what you can get in a lot of chain grocery stores. So, best value is a Toyota, Nissan. Their differentiation is reliability, but they keep their prices very low, very competitive, very affordable. So when you look at best value strategies, they're difficult because it's a very fine line. It's a balancing act. It's difficult to do over time. Target is a classic example. Every now and then they deviate from their best value strategy and they start moving towards competing more with Walmart. And that's when they get in trouble and they go back and say, well, we need to double down on our shopping difference, which is the ambiance, the atmosphere of our store, the way our products are merchandised, and the quality of our products. That's the real value that our customers see when they come to a Target store. Okay, how can companies differ? There's so many ways to differentiate yourself, so many ways. In our simulation, you could differentiate based on reliability, on speed of performance. You can differentiate based on the size of your product. You can differentiate based on your brand awareness through your marketing activity. You can differentiate based on your HR strategy, being able to deliver better HR, investing more in your employees. There's so many different ways in the real world that you could differentiate. You can differentiate based on your location. I mean, that's what Dollar General does. They like to locate in small towns where people don't have access to a Walmart and they need, like weekly goods, things that they'll use quite often. So they try to locate in places where And maybe there isn't even a bus stop, smaller towns, you'll see them. So it could be based on your geographic strategy. So many different ways you can differentiate. The key is, as we've always said from the beginning, you're differentiating, making yourself unique in a way that's important to your target market, to the market segment that you're targeting. All right. The cost leadership, well, it becomes a price war. And if that is your strategy, you better really focus on reducing your costs, right? Now, your costs better be as low, your cost structure, and cost of doing business needs to be as low as possible, because it's going to become a price war if there are a lot of people competing in that same space, trying to be the low cost leader. So usually in every industry, there's only room for a few, one or two. If you think about the big box retail industry, you've got Costco and you've got Walmart. There are very few retailers who can compete against them in that traditional cost leadership strategy. Differentiation is the most common. And again, the reason why it's easier to compete based on some other difference. It's just that you got to know yourself really well, and you have to know your customers well enough to know what's important to them to deliver this uniqueness that's valuable to them. All right. The potential risks of a differentiation strategy is that, your difference is copy. And if it's easy to copy, then you no longer have a uniqueness. So that's the importance of continuing to double down on that difference, continuing to invest in your uniqueness. So in the simulation, if you've decided to compete in one of the three niche segments, then you're going to be R&Ding every year to try to stay ahead of everyone else in terms of, how innovative you are in that segment. So the potential risks of a differentiation strategy are just that the difference between you and everybody else becomes so small that people are no longer willing to pay the additional price for your product. Because remember, it costs money to differentiate. So if you're not able to charge a higher price, then the business model doesn't work. It doesn't make good business sense unless you're able to charge a higher price for that. The potential risk of a focus strategy is that you focus too small, that the number of people who are interested in what you have to offer is so small, you can't meet your profit objectives. So, in developing, we can use the example of developing a new boutique here in Columbus. Your boutique has to be attractive to enough buyers, enough people who want to shop there to stay in business, to pay your operating expenses and your cost of goods sold. And otherwise, it just doesn't make good business sense. So when you run the numbers, you have to have the demand to meet your profit objective. That's the main risk of a focused strategy. Remember, you could have focused differentiation, focused best value, or focused cost leader as one of your strategies. Any questions for chapter 6? You will see questions related to that. This is an important chapter on the test. Okay. Let me ask you, rather than going through all of this, let me ask you what questions you have regarding chapter 7 and 8. These are more recent chapters. Some of the questions that you might see is, what's the difference between horizontal growth and vertical growth? Which one is most common? Horizontal is more common, and it's growing by adding geographic areas or adding product lines. Vertical growth is buying up channels, tiers in the channel of distribution. So you are not just a retailer, but you're also a manufacturer. You manufacture your own products, right? So it's the same thing if a manufacturer decides, like Apple did, to open up their own retail stores so they can have control over the customer experience. That's vertical growth and vertical integration. They call it vertical integration. When would you use a retrenchment strategy? All right. So most strategic plans are designed to grow. Stability is sometimes necessary. We talked about that in class. Retrenchment strategy may be necessary if you find yourself in the decline phase of the product life cycle. The need for your product is dying out, or maybe you grew too fast too soon. You realize you have too many stores, you have too many locations, and you need to cut back. In the simulation, if you're underwater, if you had a bad round, a choice that you have in the simulation is to retrench. A choice that you have is to sell off some product lines, so that's the only way you could get enough money. You probably, if you're really deep underwater, you probably won't be able to borrow enough money to get you through the next round. You'll have to retrench before you can start growing again. It may be a 2-round fix, right? Before you can start growing again. That happens, but it doesn't mean that you've already failed the whole project. It just means that you're gonna have to retrench, regroup, and grow again at a later time. All right, so we talked a little bit about this earlier. In chapter 9, we talked about this briefly because our internet was down. But what I would do in chapter 9 is go through and answer these questions. If you can answer these questions, you feel comfortable answering these questions, then I think you'll do well on the test. We talked a little bit about the 3 strategic options. The most common is we said you want to go global or multinational or hybrid. Multinational firms, it's think local, act local. In other words, what they're doing is they're changing their functional strategies to fit the needs and the culture of a particular country that they move into, sort of like the Aflac approach. Aflac's products are different in Japan than they are here in the United. Their product offerings and how they sell their products is different in Japan than it is here in the United States. It's a little bit of a hybrid approach. They do some things similarly, but because of the culture, because of the infrastructure, because of the needs of the people in Japan, Aflac does business differently in Japan. So they're more of a multinational strategy than they would be a global strategy, which would be one strategy for everyone. Coca-Cola, the flagship brand, will be sort of a global strategy, but Coca-Cola, as you know, has a hybrid approach because their product line is different depending on what country you're in. They try to satisfy the tastes of each country, the culture of each country when they go into a country. So their product line offering is different. So they change their functional area decisions a little bit when they move into different countries, even though worldwide they're one of the most well-known brands. So I might ask a question about Hofstede's cross-country cultural dimensions. So do read over that and look over that in your PowerPoints. In which dimension does the U.S. stand out compared? And that's going to be individualism. We are much higher than almost any other country in that, and that affects the way that we reward our employees and how we motivate our employees here in the United States. And when we go abroad, then our HR strategies at least would probably need to be adjusted and changed to fit the motivational needs of the country we're in, the new country we're in. Okay, so do read over. We only had, I think, 2 journal articles. We had the What is Strategy and the Balanced Scorecard article, I believe, are the only 2. Read over those, the discussion questions in those, and read my feedback on that as well. And other than that, we should be ready for any questions.